The story of God's general, Edward Payson. In the early years of America's young nation, God raised up a man whose life would burn with prayer, holiness, and passion for a revival. Edward Payson, often called Praying Payson of Portland, born in 1783 in Rindge, New Hampshire, Payson grew up in a devout household under the shadow of a faithful pastor, his father Rev. Seth Payson. From a young age, Edward possessed a brilliant mind and keen sensitivity to spiritual matters. But though intellectually gifted, he wrestled deeply with sin and guilt until the grace of Christ broke through, transforming him into a vessel of God's glory. By his early 20s, Payson became pastor of the Second Congregational Church in Portland, Maine. There he would remain for his entire ministry, marked by unshakable dedication, fervent preaching, and extraordinary prayer. His contemporaries testified that the very atmosphere of his church was heavy with the presence of God. It was said that when Payson entered the pulpit, men trembled, women wept, and hearts were pierced by the spirit of conviction. But the true secret of his ministry lay not in eloquence, but in prayer. Payson was known to spend long nights on his knees, interceding for his people. His worn wooden floor bore the deep grooves where his knees pressed so often in travail before God. Friends and fellow ministers remarked that he prayed as though heaven and earth hung in the balance. One biographer recorded, "He prayed with such reality as if he were face to face with God." Revival followed his ministry. Hardened sinners were broken. The young were drawn into consecration. Portland itself was stirred, not by programs or campaigns, but by the overflow of one man's communion with God. His life, however, was not free of suffering. Payson endured seasons of physical weakness and chronic illness, yet he bore them with patience and faith. On his deathbed in 1827, at only 44 years of age, he shone with the light of eternity. To visiting friends he said, "The battle is fought, the victory is won. I am going to bathe in an ocean of purity and benevolence, and rest forever in the bosom of Jesus." Edward Payson's story remains a challenge to every believer, that prayer is the true engine of revival, and that God still seeks men and women who will bow low that Christ may be lifted high. His legacy lives on in the countless lives changed through his ministry, and in the memory of a man whose knees wore out floors but whose prayers shook eternity. Edward Payson's life teaches us that a man on his knees before God is more powerful than armies, and that true revival begins in the secret place of prayer.